Join me as we learn Chitas together for Sunday. It's the first Torah reading of Parshas Mikeitz, chapter 41. Last week's Torah reading, we read about the story of Yosef while being in prison. The butler and the baker had a dream. Yosef interpreted the dream. The butler was returned to his position. The baker was hanged. And Yosef requested of the butler that he mention him to Pharaoh. But as the last verse of the Torah reading tells us, the butler immediately forgot about Yosef and mentioned nothing to Pharaoh. This week we begin Vayehi Mikeitz, verse 1. And it was at the end of Shnasayim, 2 full years since that episode that we finished off in last week's Torah reading. Upari Cholam, and Pharaoh has a dream. And he was standing by the Nile River. Rashi, Vayehi Mikeitz, Kitargumay, like the Targum explains, Misayf, at the end. The Cholash in Kates, anytime you find a terminology used as Kates, means Seifu, the end. Al Ya'er, on the river, the Nile River, Kol Shol Arna Aris, Einim Kruyim Ne'erim. All other rivers in the world are not called by the name Ya'er. Ya'er can also mean like an area of where water gives you a gathering of water. Chutz Me'anilus, besides the Nile River. Why was the Nile River called Ya'er? It's because the entire land of Egypt, Asun and Ya'er and Ya'er b'nei Adam, were made like man-made rivers, man-made lakes. V'chanilus oila, and when the Nile River would come up and overflow, the seicham umashkes, and would then fill those and then put water into those man-made lakes, because it doesn't regularly rain in Egypt, it's like other places, so therefore the Nile River had to give water to all the places. So what they created was canals and different lakes that then when the water of the river of the Nile would overflow, would go into those canals, and from there they would be able to water the different fields and all the other agriculture that was there. The interesting thing on the word Mikeitz, which means end, the end of what? And seemingly the two last week's Torah reading and the beginning of this week's Torah reading is a 2-year span. What's the connection between the two dreams just because they had a dream? But as we know, the word Mikeitz, in fact, the Even Ezra wants to say was in the beginning of the 2 years and now starting a new subject. But the Rebbe explains that the word Mikeitz means the end, but as well it tells us the beginning of a new era and a new chapter coming into Yosef's life. While these last 2 years were the hardest for Yosef, because since he first put his trust in the butler that he would take him out of exile, and it was a terrible suffering after 10 years of still being in prison, and however it brought about his ultimate redemption and that he should be the viceroy of Egypt. So too, in the exile that we're currently, while it may be very tough, as we know right before it gets light is the darkest time of the night, so too, the end is the toughest time, but it's also the beginning of the dawn that will come, the coming of Mashiach. Verse 2. And here is this dream. When 7 good-looking, robust cows, Sheva Paris Yefes Mara, good-looking cows are coming out of Riyos Basar, and they were robust, and they started grazing in the marsh. They came out of the Nile River, and they were grazing. Yefes Mara, Simonu Lemei Seiva. This was a sign, they were good-looking, this was a sign for the days of satiation. That people are nice to one another. That a person's not jealous of another person, there's no envy, because since there's so much, there's no reason for you to be envious of another individual. Ba'achu, what does the word ba'achu mean? Ba'agam, in the swamp. We see other places the word ba'achu talks about the grass and the swamp and the marsh that was there. Verse 3. V'hinei Sheva Paris and then another 7 cows came out after them, Mina Ya'ir from the river. However, those cows were royis madav v'dakis abasar. They were ugly and scrawny. And they stood next to the good-looking cows that were on the bank of the Nile River. V'dakis basar, Rashi says, scrawny-looking, tinbish belaz, loshin dak, from very thin, no meat on them. Verse 4. The ugly, scrawny cows ate the 7 good-looking cows, the robust cows, the healthy ones, and Paro them woke up. Fatichalna, meaning the weak ones ate the heavy ones. Simon, this was a sign to hate kol simchas asav and nishkachas, that the entire years of satiation would be forgotten b'me'arav in the time of hunger. The same way that when the skinny cows ate the big cows, there was nothing, you were not able to tell any difference from them. Verse 5. Vayishan, and he fell back asleep. Vayachalim shenis, and he had a dream a second time. V'hinei sheva shibalim, and there were 7 ears of grain. Sha'oilus bekan echad, coming healthy and good-looking, growing in one single stalk. Briyos v'toivos, healthy and good-looking. Bekana echad, tudel balaz. That means in the actual stalk, they were growing in one stalk. Briyos, they were nice, good-looking, full, shinish balaz, in the French, shinish. 6. V'hinei sheva shibalim dakis, and then 7 ears of grain sprouted after them. Ushtufes kadim, they were gaunt and parched, they were battered. Simchas acharein, came after Shtufes kadim, they were battered by the east wind. Simchas acharein sprouted after them. Shtufes means that they were dry, they were battered. Shkifes kidim chavutes, banged out. It looks like there was nothing left of them. Loshe maktev, like a lentil, that's where the door bangs on the end of lentil from it stopping. When you have the door, keep on opening and closing, what stops it from going past? The doorpost is there's a lentil hanging from the top, which is called a mashkaif, because it keeps on getting banged on. Kadim, what does it mean that it was the wind? Ruach mizrachis, the east wind, dries it out. Shekairin bisha, which is called bisha in Old French. Verse 7. And the gaunt airs then swallowed up the 7 healthy full airs. Habriyas v'amloyes, the healthy ones. Vayikas pari awoke v'inei chaloim, and it was a dream. Habriyas, the habriyas, which means shinish, the good ones. V'inei chaloim, and this was the end of the dream. Pharaoh did not have any other dreams. V'inei nishlim chalim shalim lefunav. Now he had a complete dream in front of him. Hutzrach lepaisram, and now at this point he needed people to interpret it. Verse 8. Vahi ba'bayker, and was in the morning, vatipoim ruchay, and his spirit was agitated. Vayishlach vayikra kol chartum mitzrayim, and he called all the wise men, all the magicians of Egypt, v'skol chachaman, all its wise men. Vayisaper Paro l'mischaloimei, and Paro told him his dream. Ve'impeisar l'mafari, and nobody was able to explain it. Nobody had an interpretation that he found satisfying. Vatipoim ruchay, what does it mean? Vatipoim. He was agitated. His spirit was like ringing like a bell, banging around. He couldn't find peace, soulless within himself. However, by Nebuchadnezzar, similarly, when he had a dream, over there the verse says, "Vatispa emruche," that his spirit was agitated, but with a double tough. Over there, he had 2 reasons to be agitated. Number 1, he forgot the dream. And also not knowing what the interpretation was. But over here, he not necessarily did he not know the interpretation. That's why, as we're going to see, none of them were finding good for him. Chartumei, these are the magicians. Hanoch and Metim were able to source with the dead, that they use different bones through sorcery to be able to get what the bones were tell them would be. The word timei, that's why it's called chartumei. Timei means bones in the Aramaic language. Uba Mishnah, by Yesusha Mali Tmiya, so too, you find that in the Mishnah, a home that's full of bones uses the terminology Tmaya, and its explanation means full of bones. The aim there was nobody there that was able to explain it or give an interpretation that Pharaoh should find satisfactory. What does it mean? They didn't have any interpretations. Nobody could come up with any good ideas. So Rashi explains, they actually gave interpretations. Avol, the problem was, Pari wouldn't accept them. He wouldn't listen to them. He would hear what they have to say, but he felt it was not the right one. He wouldn't be accepting of it. For example, they gave other interpretations. They would tell him, you can have 7 daughters, and you're going to bury 7 daughters. And none of them did Pharaoh feel that this was the right thing, that this was the truth. Then the Torah continues. Verse 9. And then the butler spoke up to Pharaoh, saying, I remember I mentioned my transgressions today. Verse 11. Verse 10. Pharaoh got angry at his servants. And he put me in prison, which was the prison of the chief butcher. I was in prison, and as well the baker. Verse 11. And we both had a dream the same night. Anivahu, I and him, me and the baker. Both of us not only had a dream, but we also dreamt our interpretation. Rashi explains, a dream that was befitting the interpretation that we got. That means the vision of the dream fit and matched the interpretation. V'doimelo is something that was similar to it, and we were able to explain it. V'shamitanu, and there with us in prison was Nar, a young man, Ivri, a Hebrew. Eved l'sarat tabachim, he was a servant to the chief butcher. Anesaperle, we told him about our dreams. Vayiftar lanus chalemesav, and he interpreted our dreams. Ish kachaleme passer, each of us according to his dream and its details. He said. Ish kepisrin chaleme, verse 11. Rashi explains. Chalim haroi lepisrin sheniftar lanu. Verse 12. So Rashi explains. Nar ivri eved. Why does he go through? He says a youth, a Jew, and so on. Aruri marishayim. Evil are, cursed should be the evils, the wicked people. She'ein tevasam shlema. Even when they do a favor, it's not complete. Meaning, shemaskire b'loshim b'zayim. Because if you notice how he talks about Yosef in a very denigrating way, he says it was a youth, he was a Hebrew, he was a Jew. Like, for example, Nar, says a youth, Shaita, he was foolish. And even if he tells you interpretations, he's not worthy of any appointed position that you should give him. Ivri, he was a Hebrew. Afil Lushanenu Makir, doesn't speak our language. Eved, he's a servant. It says in the ethics and the laws of Egypt, She'ein Eved Moilech, that a servant can never be a king. And shouldn't wear minister clothing. That means even if you want to appoint him to any ministerial position because he's going to tell you the interpretation, you can't because he's a servant. He explained the dreams exactly according to our dream and exactly what it should mean. And close to it was matched the interpretation. Vayehi, verse 13. Vayehi kasher pasar lanu, exactly what he interpreted for us. Kenoya, that's the way it was. That's what transpired. I was reinstated to my post. And him, the baker, Tala, you hanged him. Heishiv al-Kani, Rashi, returned to my post. Pari, what does it mean? Who returned him to his post? Pari, Hanisker Lamaila, Pari, like we mentioned before. K'may Shamar, like you said, Pari Kotzav al-Avadav. Pari, the same Pari that got angry at us. And Himikra Lashin Kotzer, this is a shortened language. Like Peter Shmi, doesn't say who. Heishiv, Lefishin Tzadach Lafar Shmi Heishiv, because he doesn't have to interpret and explain who's the one that put him back to his post. Mishab Yadi Lashiv, who's the one that's able to give him back his post. But who? Pari, and only Pharaoh's the only one. Rashi adds and says, this is usually when the verses write shorthand. When we're able to figure out who's the one that put him back to the position, the Torah doesn't have to tell you that verse. Verse 14. Vayishlach Pari, and Pari sent for Yosef. Vayikras Yosef, they called Yosef. Vayiritzu min haboyer, they hurried him out of the dungeon. Vayigalach, they gave him a haircut. Vayichalev simloisav, they changed his clothes. Vayavi al Pari, and they brought him to Pari. Min haboyer, what does it mean from the pit? Min beis hasoyer, from the prison. Shu asik min guma, because it's made like a pit in the ground. The chol chen kol bershav mikra. Anytime there's a pit that we find in the verse, let's say a pit of water, lashin guma means like a hole in the ground, something that's below ground level. Even if there's no water in it, kari bird, they'll still call it a pit. Vayigalach, why did they give him a haircut? They covered him out of respect for the king. Verse 15. In fact, this concludes the Torah reading for Sunday Parshas Mikeitz.